Of all the Nazi leaders the Allies might have removed, why was he singled out? Not Hitler, not Himmler, not Goebbels. They chose Reinhard Heydrich, and that choice set off a chain of events that cost more than 5,000 innocent lives. It stands as the only time Allied forces successfully killed a top-ranking Nazi. And the reasons for the operation, the way it was carried out, and the blood-soaked consequences are far grimmer than most people realize. To grasp why Heydrich became the objective, you must first understand the man and the power he wielded. Heydrich was no mere functionary. He was arguably the third most important figure in the Reich after Hitler and Himmler. As chief of the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA, he ran the Gestapo, directed SS intelligence, and supervised the entire Nazi security apparatus. His most infamous legacy was his central role in designing and coordinating the final solution. On January 20, 1942, about 4 months before he was mortally wounded, Heydrich presided over the Wannsee Conference. In that short meeting, at a Berlin suburb villa, Nazi bureaucrats laid out the logistics of the systematic extermination of European Jews. Discussing transport lists, deportation timetables, and methods of mass murder, no one present registered an objection. Afterward, Heydrich reportedly relaxed by the fireplace with his aides, smoking cigars and drinking brandy, an image that underlined how confident, even complacent, he had become after consolidating control of genocide and repression. Newspapers and occupied populations labeled him the Butcher of Prague. Even fellow Nazis described him as cold and implacable. Himmler allegedly called him the man with the iron heart. In September 1941, Hitler installed Heydrich as acting Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia, Czechoslovak. The brutality of his rule was immediate and systematic. Within days of his arrival, dozens were executed. Within a few months, thousands of Czech patriots had been detained and hundreds executed. He ran the protectorate with efficient cruelty, increasing production for the Reich while crushing dissent, turning Czechoslovakia into a showcase of Nazi order. From the perspective of Czechoslovak leaders in exile, the situation was catastrophic. Edward Bernays, the president, in London, watched Allied conferences rank Czechoslovakia at the bottom of the list for resistance activity. With factories supplying German war production and little visible armed struggle, Bernays feared Czech claims would be ignored in post-war negotiations. He decided the country needed a dramatic, unmistakable demonstration that it was on the Allied side, an action that would seize international attention and force a reassessment of Czech resistance. Eliminating a top Nazi on Czech soil, rather than attempting an almost impossible strike inside Germany, seemed the way to achieve that political effect. The British Special Operations Executive backed the plan because it offered tactical and propaganda benefits. It would show even senior Nazis were vulnerable. It might disrupt Nazi security structures by removing their head, and it could inspire other occupied peoples to resist. Choosing the specific target involved weighing options, but Heydrich's concentration of influence, role in orchestrating mass murder, and his position as acting ruler of the protectorate made him the principal prize. Crucially, Heydrich's arrogance made him vulnerable. Hitler had issued 3 explicit security orders for his protection: travel only in armored cars, always move with armed guards, and vary his daily routes. Heydrich flouted all of them. He routinely rode in an open-topped Mercedes without a permanent escort and habitually followed the same path each morning, convinced that no resistance force could touch him. In October 1941, Czech intelligence chief František Moravec selected 2 exiled, parachute-trained soldiers in Britain for the operation: Josef Gabke, a Slovak, and Jan Kubas, a Czech. The SO put them through months of intensive training in Scotland, handling weapons, demolitions, survival craft, and escape techniques. The mission was codenamed Operation Anthropoid, literally human-shaped, and on December 28, 1941, the teams were dropped into occupied territory. The landing was difficult. Equipment was lost, and the newcomers had to make contact with a local underground that feared reprisals. By spring 1942, the mission was faltering. Other teams had been compromised. German security had tightened, and many in the Czech resistance urged London to abort the plan, warning that reprisals would be catastrophic. London, however, reconfirmed the order to proceed. When intelligence indicated Heydrich might soon be reassigned to a post in France, planners concluded they had to act immediately or lose their chance. Surveillance revealed a weak point in Heydrich's routine. Every morning at roughly 10:30, his dark green Mercedes slowed for a tight hairpin turn in the Prague suburb of Líbek near Belovka Hospital. That curve would be the ambush site. On May 27, 1942, Gabke and Kubas took up positions at a tram stop, while another operative, Joseph Valke, posted farther up the street with a mirror to signal the approach of Heydrich's car. As the Mercedes rounded the corner and reduced speed, Gabke stepped out, drew a Sten submachine gun from under his coat, and fired only to find the weapon had jammed. For a suspended second, he stood frozen as Heydrich's car glided into view, and the Nazi leader locked eyes with his attacker. Heydrich did not order a hasty retreat. Instead, he made the fateful choice to stop and confront the assailants. As he rose to draw his pistol, Goebbels reacted by throwing a modified anti-tank grenade at the vehicle. The blast was powerful and shredded part of the car, gravely wounding Heydrich and killing or injuring those nearby. In the chaotic moments that followed, the assassins tried to escape. Czech civilians, railway police, and German troops swarmed the area. Heydrich was rushed to a hospital where surgeons removed shrapnel and treated serious internal injuries. But infection set in, and his condition deteriorated. He died days later, a blow that stunned Nazi leadership and reverberated across Europe. The assassination's immediate political and moral effects were complex and horrific. The Nazi response was swift, brutal, and indiscriminate. In a campaign of collective punishment ordered from the highest levels, entire villages were razed, thousands were arrested, and mass executions followed. The famous examples of Lidice and Lubaki symbolized the scale of the reprisals. Communities were destroyed, men shot, women deported, children separated or killed, and the countryside was terrorized to intimidate any thought of resistance. Conservative estimates put the number of civilians who perished in the wake of Heydrich's death at over 5,000. Internationally, the operation achieved some of Beneš's political aims. Czechoslovakia's plight and the heroism of the agents received widespread attention, and Allied publics were made starkly aware of both the brutality of Nazi rule and the price of active resistance. But the cost raised agonizing ethical questions that historians still debate. Was the political gain worth the thousands of lives taken in revenge? Did the assassination strengthen resistance and morale? Or did it provoke reprisals that made ordinary civilians pay the price for actions taken by a few? In the short term, the attack did show that top Nazi officials were not invulnerable, and it inspired other clandestine fighters. In the long term, the episode became a touchstone for discussions about the limits and unintended consequences of targeted killings in wartime. The story of Operation Anthropoid is therefore not a tidy tale of righteous vengeance. It is tangled with ambition, desperation, bravery, miscalculation, and a brutal aftermath that exposes how wartime choices can force impossible moral trade-offs. Asterisk, the explosive did not strike Heydrich himself. It blew against the Mercedes rear wheel. What ultimately killed one of the Reich's most powerful figures was not the blast alone, but fragments of the car, bits of metal, dirt, and even horsehair from upholstery driven deep into his body and lodging in his spleen. Heydrich actually rose after the blast. He pursued Gabke on foot, firing his pistol, before collapsing. His driver chased Goebbels until Goebbels wounded him in the leg. Both attackers vanished into the confusion of Prague's streets, convinced their mission had failed because Heydrich was alive, moving, and returning fire. They did not know the debris embedded in his body was slowly poisoning him from within. Heydrich was taken to Belovka Hospital. At first, the injuries did not appear to be instantly fatal. A broken rib, a ruptured diaphragm, and shrapnel in his spleen. Surgeons were cautiously hopeful. 8 days later, on June 4, 1942, sepsis developed, blood poisoning caused by the infected fragments, and he died in great pain. He was felled not directly by Allied ordnance but by infected horsehair and splinters from his own luxury car. Hitler was furious, not only over the assassination but over what he saw as Heydrich's negligence. Privately, he railed that someone as indispensable as Heydrich had exposed himself by traveling in an open, unarmored vehicle. He called it stupid and idiotic. Publicly, however, Hitler staged an ornate state funeral, draping Heydrich's pillow with the German Order, the Blood Order, and other decorations, then demanded retribution. His first impulse was to execute 10,000 Czechs at random, but after advisors counseled him, he revised the plan. Indiscriminate slaughter might harm war production, so carefully targeted reprisals would send a clearer message. The regime turned to torture to extract information from resistance prisoners. Under interrogation, on June 13th, a Czech parachutist named Karel Krdea, terrified for his family, betrayed the hiding place of the assassins. Gabzik Goebbels and 5 other resistance fighters had taken refuge in the crypt beneath the Saints Cyril and Methodius Church in Prague. On June 18th, some 800 SS and Gestapo troops surrounded the church. A lengthy battle followed. The survivors of the attack fell back to the crypt, where the Germans tried to smoke them out with gunfire and tear gas, flooded the cellar using the fire brigade, and finally used explosives to force entry. The 7 paratroopers inflicted significant losses on their attackers. Despite being outnumbered by more than 100 to 1, they killed 14 SS men and wounded 21. When their ammunition was exhausted and escape impossible, they chose death over capture. Some died of wounds sustained during the fight. Others, including Gab K, took cyanide in the flooded crypt. The man who betrayed them, Karel Krdea, did more than collect a reward of 1 million Reich. The Nazis gave him a new life, a Germanized name, citizenship, a marriage to a German woman connected to the Gestapo, and the role of a walking decoy. Posing as a British agent, he infiltrated resistance circles, turned in contacts, and directly contributed to the capture and execution of hundreds of Czechs before the war ended. At his 1947 treason trial, Kurta expressed no remorse, reportedly claiming he would have done the same for the money. He was hanged on April 29, 1947, at Pankrock prison. The reprisals, however, did not stop with arrests and betrayals. The Nazis sought scapegoats in their searches, aided by torture and false leads, led to grotesque acts of collective punishment. One such pretext sprang from a lie in a private breakup letter. A man named Vaclav Gira, trying to dramatize a failed affair, bragged in a letter to a mistress that he had been involved in the assassination. A factory foreman intercepted the note and handed it to the Gestapo, who treated the boast as proof and used it to justify annihilating the village of Lidice. On June 10, 1942, German forces encircled Lidice, a village of about 500 people, roughly 12 miles from Prague. They executed every male over 1,173 men and boys, and deported the women to Ravensbrück concentration camp, where most perished. The children were examined. Those deemed racially suitable were taken for Germanization, while others were sent to extermination sites. 81 children were murdered in gas vans at Chelmno extermination camp. The Nazis razed Lidice to the ground, then attempted to erase its memory by obliterating the ruins. A similar atrocity occurred at Lebaki on June 24, where all 33 adults were shot and the children deported. Bishop Garasht, the head of the Orthodox Church who had sheltered the assassins, turned himself in to protect his congregation, writing, "I and I alone am responsible." He and his priests were executed. None betrayed their comrades under torture. Marie Moravkova, mother of one resistance member, swallowed cyanide rather than face the Gestapo. Her whole family was murdered. In the immediate wave of reprisals, more than 1,300 Czechs were executed and thousands more arrested and deported to concentration camps, such as Mauthausen, where survival rates were grim. Counting long-term deaths from deportation and camp conditions, estimates of the total killed in the wake of Heydrich's assassination rise to 5,000 or more. 5,000 lives taken to avenge a single Nazi leader. That brutal tally haunts the ethical assessment of Operation Anthropoid. Was the mission justified? The question tormented Czech exiles at the time and continues to divide historians. Militarily, the operation's direct effect was limited. Heinrich Himmler assumed Heydrich's duties briefly until a permanent replacement was appointed. Darker still is the irony that the final solution intensified after Heydrich's death. Within months, the principal death camps, Sobibor and Belzík, constructed and became operational under the Nazi program codenamed Operation Reinhard, named in Heydrich's honor. His killing, therefore, did not halt the Holocaust. Tragically, it became part of its commemoration and accelerated aspects of the genocide. The Czech underground was devastated. Many networks were dismantled and never fully reconstituted. Politically, however, the assassination achieved what Beneš had sought. The destruction of Lidice shocked the world and galvanized sympathy. Towns abroad renamed themselves in solidarity Lidice, Illinois, and Lidice in other countries, and headlines everywhere carried the story of Czech resistance. On August 5, 1942, Britain formally renounced the Munich Agreement, strengthening Czechoslovakia's claim to its pre-war borders and helping ensure the country's eventual restoration after the war. Heydrich's death also proved that even top Nazi officials were not invulnerable. The British even prepared plans to kill Hitler in 1944 under Operation Foxley, though that plot was never carried out. Yet the controversy remains. The British and the Czechoslovak government in exile were aware that massive reprisals would follow and that innocent civilians would die, and they proceeded nonetheless. Whether that sacrifice can be morally defended depends on perspective. The leaders in London who sought a dramatic political outcome, or the villagers of Lidice who perished on June 10, 1942. Reinhard Heydrich was one of the most dangerous figures in Nazi Germany, the architect of the final solution. Feared by many for his cold ruthlessness, Operation Anthropoid was the Allies' only successful wartime killing of a senior Nazi official, carried out by men like Gab K and Kubas, who parachuted into enemy territory, knowing they had little chance of returning. But their bravery exacted a staggering price. More than 5,000 Czech civilians lost their lives. Entire communities were wiped from the map, and families were destroyed. The legacy of Anthropoid is tangled. It is a tale of remarkable courage and utter barbarity, of hard choices and moral paradoxes. In the end, Heydrich died not on a battlefield, against his own forces, but because he arrogantly rode through occupied streets in an unarmored car without adequate protection, and because two determined men risked everything to strike back at